He might ask us to forgive somebody who's really hurt us. And we want to hold on to that grudge. We want to hold on to that anger. We want to get them back. We wake up in the middle of the night thinking about revenge, and then here comes Jesus saying, no, you forgive. And we remind ourselves, we remember, wow, following this guy is risky. He asked me to do things that on my own I could never, ever do. He even takes it further. He says, you know what, if you're one of my followers, people are going to insult you, and they're going to hate you, and they're going to cast your name as evil, and they might even try to kill you, but I'm going to be with you. So no matter what you're going through, I'm going to be right there with you. So what's the very first risk that we have to take if we want to move forward? I'm going to put it on the screen. It's 2 words. It's so simple, it's going to be shocking. The very first step to taking a risk. Here it is. Trust God. It seems a little ridiculous, doesn't it? But if we don't start with that part, if we don't get the trusting God part right, then nothing else matters. The Israelites won't go into the promised land under Moses because really, if we're honest, they didn't trust that God would take care of them. They thought that the tall, buff people were more powerful than God was. And these are the people who 10 times had seen God work through the plagues. 10 times had seen God's power. These are the people who watched as Moses took them through the Red Sea, parted the sea for them, brought it back over the Egyptians. They had seen all of this. And these are the same people who, even though claiming to be faithful, didn't trust God when it really happened. Step 1 is saying, if I'm going to be faithful, I'm going to have to take the risk of trusting God, and then it's believing that God will take care of us when we take the risks. It's a mindset. We have to get the mind part right first. You see, so often what I think happens is we come to something like this, or we come to a class, or we hear a speaker, or we watch something on TV, and we get all fired up, and we're like, we come back to our churches, and we're like, let's do it! And we might start a program, we might start a class, we might start something new, and it works for maybe a month or 2 months, and then slowly we kind of go right back to where we were, and we go, well, I don't know what happened. It seemed like such a great idea. Well, what happened is that we didn't get the mind part right. We didn't get the heart part right. We didn't deep down really trust that God would take care of us. Here's what this mindset looks like, at least it has been at our church. The first step is we trust that God will take care of us. Then we believe nothing is impossible with God. And then we truly believe that God is our safety net. You know the verses from Jeremiah 29. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. This mindset, this heart set, it always involves discussion. I really challenge you this week, leaders, pastors, get together and talk about this stuff. Talk about whether you really believe these things or not, because if we don't believe them, we will never be successful in taking risk, ever. At my church, when we were thinking about starting our second campus in the Walltown area, a really tough part of town, a group had come to us that owned some property. It was an old church, and it was an office building and a fellowship hall, and their ministry was going under. And they came to us and said, would you take over this property and start a campus here and try to continue on our stuff? And if I'm really honest, when I heard that, a big part of me was thrilled and jumped for joy, and a huge part of me was terrified because I knew how hard this part of town was. Our leaders got together for a month straight and prayed every day, asking God, is this where you are leading us? We were afraid of the crime. We were afraid of the gangs. We had no idea what we were doing. And so we prayed, God, help us to trust you. Because we felt like God was leading us to do it, and yet we were scared. So on the one hand, it was like God saying, do it. On the other hand, we were saying we were afraid, and so we kept praying and praying, God, help us to trust you. God, help us to believe that nothing is impossible with you. God, help us to know that you're our safety net. You'll take care of us no matter what. And so at the end of that month, we said, you know what? We think God's leading us to do it. And we opened a campus there. As some of you may have heard in the news a few years ago, 3 months into our having a campus there was a gun battle across the street, and during one of our worship services, one of our pastors got shot right in the middle of worship. It took our breath away. All of our fears came flying back. All of them. That somebody would get hurt. We were afraid somebody would get hurt. We didn't dream somebody would get shot. He ended up being just fine. The day after we were shot, our leaders all got back together. The day after he was shot, our leaders all got back together again. And if I'm really honest, there was almost a little feeling of panic. We didn't know if we should shut it down and get out. And luckily, a really wise person in that room said, you know what, let's go back to praying like we had prayed before we came out here. And so we prayed again, Lord, help us to trust you. Lord, help us to believe that nothing is impossible with you. Lord, help us to believe you'll take care of us even in the midst of something like this. And that next Monday, we were right back out there again. I didn't know if there would be a soul there. I knew I would be there. I knew my wife would be there. I didn't know if anybody else would show up. And that Monday night, we were packed. Packed. God reminding us, your risk is worth it. I'm absolutely with you. Here's what we had to do, and you'll have to do it too. We had to over and over and over keep getting the mindset part right, keep getting the heart part right. It's not something you do once and you check it off the list. We constantly have to be going back saying, Lord, help us to trust you more. Lord, help us to believe that nothing is impossible with you. And so here's what I challenge you to do. In your own church setting, get your leaders together, get your pastor, get everybody in a room, and ask yourself, do we really believe that God is all-powerful? Do we really believe that God will walk with us as we take a risk? And then most importantly, you have to see if you're willing to do this. Not bungee jump from a balloon. When I was, 25, no, it was probably 30 years ago, living in Dallas. I was working for an investment bank. 2 of my best friends came in town, and we said, we're going to go balloon bungee jumping. So we didn't have cell phones with cameras back then. We all had brought, video cameras. And my 2 friends go first. They both jumped. They're like, woo! They're loving it, having their best time. So it's my turn. I get in this balloon. I go up 250 feet high in the balloon. It felt like 500,000 feet. It's only the balloon guy and me. I am terrified, like can't breathe terrified. And I look at the balloon guy and I go, has anyone ever chickened out? And he goes, this is my 943rd trip, and I've had one person chicken out. And I said, well, what was he like? And he said, well, she was a 6-year-old girl. And he said, just step out of the balloon onto the plank. And honest to goodness, if my 2 friends had not been below videotaping this, and I would not have known that had I chickened out, that video would have lived forever. I would have said, take me down. But instead I stepped out and I turned to him and I said, what's the next step? And he said, let go. What do you have to let go of in order to take a risk in your church or in your ministry? Do you have to let go of having all the info, every single I dotted and T crossed? Do you have to let go of knowing where every single penny will come from before you even start? Do you have to let go of feeling totally safe? This week, get together with your church, certainly by the end of this month, and talk about these things. Do we really trust God? What tangible evidence do we have that we do? Man, it's easy to say, oh yeah, I trust God. What tangible evidence do you have that you actually do trust God? Do we really believe God is all-powerful? Can we tell any stories about when we believed that God was all-powerful? And then have that tough conversation. What do we need to let go of? Once we think we're ready to take a risk, we have to be careful, and here's why. Because faithful risk can instantly swing. You know, if this is unfaithful comfort, the pendulum can swing all the way over here real quickly. We get crazy excited, we're like, woohoo, let's go, we're awesome, we're you know, Jesus should be lucky to have us. And we just like go sprinting forward, right? All the way over into recklessness. Here's what we end up doing sometimes. We do this. We go ready, fire, aim. Man, there's homeless around us. We want to do something to help the homeless. Let's go out and give them a bunch of cash. Or we say, you know what, man, we need to expand our children's ministry. We need some stuff to happen. Let's just go hire somebody. They'll take care of all of it. We say, oh my gosh, the church right down the road has just built something new. We don't really need any more space, but we better build something new too. So let's just go out there. Our budget's only $200,000, but let's build a $4 million building because we got to keep up. Pastors, sometimes we'd say things like, well, I just need to move. Or churches, we say, wow, let's just if we could just get the right minister in here, you know, and the right minister is always about the same by stereotypical, right? If I could just get someone who's 35 years old, but the best preacher on earth and loves to visit all the time and will work 24/7, but still take care of his or her family. In order not to be reckless, here's what we do. We check our motives. If when you're talking about stuff you ever use the word should, you know you've got the wrong motives. We should have a great men's ministry. Well, we don't have any men who are interested in it. We don't care. Let's just start it anyhow because we should have one. We should have a great youth group. There's no youth who come to our church. We don't care. Let's have a youth group because everybody else has one. The word should is rarely a faithful word. You'll know your motives are wrong if in what you're doing you're trying to make somebody else happy. If you're trying to make the DS happy, or you're trying to make a big giver happy, or the matriarch or patriarch of the church, if what you're doing is trying to make someone else happy, wrong motives. Certainly if you're trying to get your numbers higher so you'll look better, absolutely wrong motives. If your motives are anything other than furthering God's kingdom and God's glory, you've got to put the brakes on it. You've got to take a step back and say, what are we doing here? Because your motives are wrong and you'll end up looking like this guy. A lot of you may not have any idea who this is. This is Brian Adams. He had an album called Reckless. I thought that was funny. So the first step's mindset. And then we make sure we're not running off recklessly. And at that point, when our mind and our heart are right and we're sure we're not being reckless, then we're ready to take some first steps. But so often we say, man, I don't know what that first step would be. Here's the very first step. Confront the brutal facts. If you've read the great business book called Good to Great, he has a whole chapter on this. It'd be worth your reading. It's by a man named Jim Collins. Here's what I mean by confront the brutal facts. You get together and you talk about what's not working well in your church, because usually it's easiest to take a risk in an area that's not working well because it's already not going well. So if it's already not going well, you can take a risk. If it doesn't work out, great, okay, because it already wasn't going well. So you get together and you say, wow, our children's program isn't working. Let's try something different in it. We've always done this. This feels comfortable to us, but no kids are coming. Let's take a risk and try something different. Or you say, wow, we haven't really had a visitor at our church in months, or that time we had one, they didn't stay. And we go, yeah, but you know what? We like our worship service. We like how it goes. It feels good to us. But you go, wait, hold on a second. We haven't had a visitor in months. And so you say, you know what? Let's take a little risk here. Let's try something different just to see if that might work. Maybe you've got that person on a committee who has no business being on a committee. You're thinking of somebody right now. I know it. They've got no business being on that committee. But they've been on there forever. And you know if nominations didn't put them on that committee again, there'd be hell to pay. But they're not helping the committee. They sabotage the committee. They're negative all the time. Maybe it's time to take a risk with some of your leaders. So the first thing we do is we confront the brutal facts. It gives us an idea of where we should take a risk. And then we do this. We start with something small. I guarantee you, if you leave here today and go back and say something gargantuan, it won't fly. Start small. Give yourself some practice. This is the cool thing. Even big churches or small churches can do this. You can take a small step. And I'm going to ask Steve Autry if he would come up to the stage for a second. Steve's the pastor at Denver, United Methodist in Denver, and he told me the coolest story about something his church did. It was a small step, and yet it was a powerful step, and it was incredibly faithful. So say hi to Steve, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, serving in Denver, it's a great place, but don't serve a church that is accustomed to taking risks. Our folks think that failure to winterize your jet ski is taking a risk. And so sometimes you need to build some change into the DNA of the church. Came up on my first Christmas at the church, and came time to put the poinsettias in the church. How many of y'all still do that, right? You buy the poinsettias, or people buy them, honor, memory, flowers stay up there through the Christmas season, and then they get thrown in the trash. So it simply said, is that really faithful? Ask them the questions, is this what God wants? Us to have some nice flowers that just get thrown away? Is that what Christmas is about? So came up with this idea to simply ask people, instead of buying the flowers, to buy children's books. We had our local schools, and we do serve Lincoln County, which has quite a bit of poverty. A lot of kids in that county have no books in their home. So we simply said, we can partner with a local agency. We can purchase the books. People still get to say, oh, it's in memory of someone, it's in honor of someone, it still goes in the bulletin. But instead of flowers up there, we had books up there. And that began some conversations about what else can we do? How else can we change some habits in small ways that may become something bigger? It allowed us to step into this year at Thanksgiving. We would get together and have a large congregational meal where the church would buy the turkey, dressing, gravy, all that kind of stuff. We were spending almost $2,000 on that meal. And we asked, did anybody in our particular congregation need another Thanksgiving meal? The answer was overwhelmingly no. Is anybody in our congregation going to go hungry if they don't eat this meal? No. So it allowed us then to take those resources and partner with Servants with a Heart, which is a food packing ministry. And it's kind of like Stop Hunger Now. So we took that money, instead of spending it on ourselves, and gave it over to them. Or brought them in. And we had our fellowship time while we packed meals for other people. We ended up packing about 50,000 meals to go out to local community and down into South America. And so, we didn't change everything. And one of the things in watching how Scott has done News Story and watching his journey is he has a very different context than what I serve. But what I've learned from him is find ways to introduce change into the system, even if it's small. Begin, do something. Another thing I found helpful is to look back at the history of the church. Your church wouldn't exist unless someone took a risk somewhere along the way. Mine deep for those stories, and then come back and tell those stories to your people. Say things like, did you realize in 1950 we did this? Or did you know that in 1985 this church did that? Because those stories are there. It's all about, I believe, beginning to help a church understand that they have done it in the past, and they can do it again in the future. So that's my simple story.
Good, thank you.